iterations.
And
How's
so
that theme
yeah,
music? That theme music's amazing. I feel like I just need,
well, I
like,
did nothing. What is happening over
so
there?
good to be here. So happy to be here.
It's great, Nugget, to have you here, and I guess it will be very interesting. So, first of all, how are you? What are you doing these times?
So I'm Chief Product Officer at a company called Platform.sh. So if you think of platform as a service, but not the old school platform as a service, and really, I kind of quip that in a way, DevOps is dead, pay us instead, is kind of my running joke. But honestly, it's about giving application developers a way to just take code and turn it into an application really easily in production.
Now you have to explain what is old and what is new under this perspective.
So I think one of the things is it's very GitOps-driven. So one of the things that I think is super, super cool about what we do is, say you've got a Git repository for your application with all of the YAML files that basically make it run on our platform. If you create a pull request or create a branch, it automatically forks your whole environment. Your whole running application gives you a consistent data snapshot of everything that's running. So I can try out something, create a little pull request, and suddenly I get another whole copy of my application that I can test against. I can send you a URL for that. So it's really great if you're building applications and you've got customers or stakeholders. You can go, okay, well, let me try this out. And then they get a whole copy of the application in production, which I think is super cool.
But let me ask the evil questions. How does it work with complex applications with maybe many moving parts and so on?
Yeah, no, totally works. So it works well with backend applications, works well as a big monolith. You sort of have several choices. You can either have one project in using our terminology per application, or you can have multiple applications inside the same project. So yeah, works really well with lots of moving parts, with lots of built-in services. So you can do things like click a button and just stand up RabbitMQ and use that as messaging for your microservices. It's very exciting.
Cool. So you moved from the good old Puppet to this message queue in the cloud project, which was, I always called the company you were working on.
Synadia. So I spent last year at Synadia and working with some great people from the old Puppet days, including Ari Panar, the guy who built the original M Collective, and Hira. So we were working together on that. I'm still a huge fan of NATS, the technology that is at that company. I think there are many, infrastructure is too complicated. And I think in many ways, this has been the thing I've been trying to do at every company. I think infrastructure is too complicated. Puppet was one way we were trying to resolve that. I think if you look at NATS, having a messaging framework and pub sub, key value store, all of those things built in means you don't need as much in terms of load balancers and databases and all of these surrounding bits of infrastructure that were complicated. So really simplified application development. And then now I'm at Platform.sh, which really I think just goes to simplify the infrastructure problem by going, just let us run it for you. So I've always been a huge fan of platforms. I think, when I was at Google, I built platforms using Puppet. When I was at Puppet, what we were doing for most of our customers was building platforms. And so I think it's a pretty natural evolution from DevOps into sort of platform engineering and then platform engineering as a product.
Nice. But, the usual question is at this point, all these abstractions layers, which makes things easier for the end users, somehow hide the complexity behind. How do you deal with this complexity?
Yeah, so I think I've certainly changed my philosophy a little bit in that I think I used to think of the job of abstractions as being to hide complexity entirely from users. But I think I've come to the viewpoint now that you can't just give people a black box. I think if you've got smart developers who understand how the cloud works and infrastructure works, they may not want to manage and operate and deal with the daily grind of maintaining all of that stuff. But also when things go wrong, you need to be able to poke at it and work out, what is going wrong right now? Which parts of, is it your infrastructure that I'm hosted on? Is it my application? Is it some combination of those things? So what we're trying to do at Platform is very much give people, make it so that they don't have to look inside the black box, but also still give them the ability to do it if they need to.
And what is behind the black box? What kind of technologies are you using?
I mean, we've got, it's a container orchestration system. We have, a whole bunch of stuff in terms of build caches and lots of distributed work. We can host, we're very multi-cloud. So you can come to us and go, look, I want to host this on Amazon in this region, or even we work with a lot of the European providers. So people like OVH. So it's not just the big cloud hyperscalers, but genuinely multi-cloud across, I guess, tier 1 and tier 2 and 3 cloud providers as well.
Wow, nice. I guess I should try it then.
You should try it out. So we've got a new version. So anyone who's watching this, please go check out upsun.com. We've essentially built a new interface with a different usage-based pricing model on top of all these things, but all of those capabilities that I talked about are there. So what we do with customers is we essentially let people, we have what we call the grid, the big shared infrastructure that everyone runs on, but we also have a bunch of really big customers, people like Adobe and Nestle, who we will run stuff on dedicated infrastructure for them. So we power Magento Cloud and a bunch of the sort of big e-commerce sites as well.
Okay. I would say let's make a jump back into the past, which actually is also still present. Puppet, good old Puppet. Do you think Puppet is still a future or a present? And how can adapt eventually to the evolving technologies and IT?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I'm still very emotionally attached to Puppet. I spent 12 years there. I did a lot of different jobs there. Met lots of really great friends like you through the community, and I still think there was something incredibly special about that point in time where it wasn't just so much Puppet the technology that was amazing. It was, we gathered together a group of people who cared about making the way we work better in operations and sysadmin. And I think that was one of the things I loved about the whole early DevOps space before the term became relatively meaningless. And I think that was incredibly special. The software itself, I think the reality is most people don't care about configuring operating systems as much these days, for new greenfield development in particular. I think one of the huge benefits that the whole industry adopted around containers in general was it meant that you weren't reliant upon your release engineering or delivery teams or your operations teams. Developers became much more self-sufficient, which caused problems, but it also solved a whole bunch of problems as well. I still think Puppet is unparalleled in terms of configuring an operating system. If you have an operating system and you have, legacy or traditional workloads running on it, having that declarative config, being able to collaborate around those things, it's absolutely amazing. And there's a huge, rich ecosystem. There's just lots of great stuff in terms of both open source and commercial there. So I think the need for configuring operating systems has gone from being something everyone had to worry about in developing applications to a subset of those people. But the reality, I think, is that a lot of those legacy applications, they're not going to get modernized anytime soon. And the easiest way to lift and shift those to the cloud in many ways is go and manage the workload with Puppet, and then go and move that, redefine that and move the workload to the cloud using Puppet.
Yeah. And when I think about operating systems, I mean, also I wouldn't exclude the desktop operating systems, the ones which are still not containerized.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because I think people ask me a lot about desktop management and laptop management with Puppet, because that's what we did at Google, and we had 50,000, 60,000 machines or something like that, and they were end user machines. I'm a bit less convinced by that use case these days, because I think for most IT departments, the laptop and the workstation are no longer the primary computing interface for everyone. Everyone needs to be able to get to things with their phone, with their tablet, mobile devices. And in many ways, I think it makes more sense to go and adopt a really good MDM, mobile device management system, that can do your laptops and your phones. because that's the working environment most people live in these days.
Okay, so both at the same time.
Yeah. And I think Puppet always had a fatal flaw, I think, in terms of desktop management, which is that there's no model of interaction with the user. So the use case I always come back to is if you think about a well-configured Windows enterprise environment, the admins can go, let's go push an update out, but we know it's going to interrupt the user while they're installing it. So you get the little pop-up in the corner going, hey, there's an update available. Do you want to install that? And you can say delay. You can delay it 2 or 3 times, but no more. But the user has that choice of when they actually apply it. Because like if you look at Mac OS X, for example, and you've got Puppet running in the background, there's the user land going on, and then Puppet's entirely disconnected from that and doesn't really communicate with the user. The user doesn't get to interrupt the event loop by default.
I mean, in these times, the obvious question is about AI. What is your general idea on this new revolution jumping around? Honestly, I'm starting to get a bit bored about these discussions because it feels like when we are talking about the internet in the early before 2000s, and everybody was talking about this thing and the philosophy and the technology and everything. And I feel like we are in the same condition now. Nobody talks about the power of the internet in terms of this commodity. I guess we will stop to talk about AI soon, but not yet.
Yeah, I have really mixed feelings. So first, I had to get over the fact that I don't like the fact that we call what we're doing now AI. Like Gen AI is, I think, a better term. I think, artificial intelligence for me, I did a philosophy degree in philosophy of mind and cognitive science. And so AI for me was always around general purpose, in artificial general intelligence. And we're clearly not there yet. I think it's really interesting, but I'm also rather cynical. I think there's a really great quote I can't remember who actually said it, but they were like, when it comes to disruptive technology, we always overestimate the short-term impact and underestimate the long-term impact, which I think is, so, you can talk about things like mobile. When the iPhone came out, did anyone really think that that was going to turn into a ride-sharing service, which created Uber, which created traffic problems all over cities and fundamentally disrupted the taxi industry? We probably would never have thought about that. But at the same time, in the first 6 months of the iPhone coming out, everyone made pretty crappy iPhone apps. Everyone was like, oh, this is going to be amazing. Here's another flashlight. So I think we're in that sort of state with AI. I'm also reasonably cynical at the moment in that I think there was a lot of pent-up money in investment money around looking for the next big thing. We saw a huge failure really in terms of Web3 and crypto. And so that plus COVID, when lots of VC firms stopped investing for a while, I think meant that there was a lot of pent-up money that had to go somewhere. And so everyone was looking for the big new thing. So I think it's both overhyped and potentially underhyped. We're seeing some pretty amazing things that some people are doing. So if you look at what Dylan and the team are doing at Overmind, if you go to overmind.tech, they have lots of really great stuff they're doing around AI to do things like go, let me explain to you in natural language the impact of this particular Terraform change. So it goes and looks at your Amazon infrastructure, looks at your Terraform code and goes, hey, you're going to forget this port's open here on this load balancer. It's not open here. You've got 2 different ports. That's going to result in the service going down. And so giving you that human readable impact, I think is really, really powerful. But I think there was a big scramble for companies to add AI features to their platforms and to their software. And most of it's not useful. I think we're still working out exactly how it should be useful.
Yeah, and the problem is sometimes not reliable, and
absolutely,
so you have to understand what is true and what is not.
Yeah, one of the things I think that I find frustrating about our industry is we're often looking for the quick fix, and so you see lots of people doing things like going, okay, we've got an AI system that will, look at all your ITSM tickets and work out which ones can be closed and which ones can be opened and what needs to be followed up. in many ways, I think it sort of papers over the cracks. And if people just organize their companies better, they were a bit more sane with process, they worked out how to move more quickly, I think quality would increase and you'd have a lower number of tickets. So it's clearly useful, but I think I worry some ways that people look for AI as a really quick fix to problems that they should just be working out how to solve in other ways.
And in terms of computing, I mean, we have seen many things happening in the paradigms behind how computing is done. And after containers, after lambdas of functions, what can happen? What could be the next thing, if there will be any kind of next thing in this sense?
I think we're going to see. So I think there's a couple of factors driving us towards the fact that we're going to end up pushing compute workloads closer to the edge. Things like Cloudflare workers, et cetera, because, and I think there's a few different reasons. One is, I think we're going to get better and better at running small footprint workloads that use less energy and have a lower environmental impact. To return to the AI thread, it's somewhat criminal that in this era where we're dealing with a climate crisis, where everything's so existential, literally for the future of humanity, that we've gone. So crypto wasn't enough, where we were going to start just burning carbon and energy for no particular reason, just to check two numbers added up to be the same thing. To then going, okay, well, now we're going to consume lots and lots of energy with AI that we could do more efficiently. So I do think that environmental concerns are just going to have to get bigger and bigger, and as a factor in terms of what people are doing. We're starting to see regulation in Europe driving people towards that. And I think we're going to start to see something like if you look at the FinOps movement, I think we're going to see some sort of green ops movement where people are doing carbon credit accounting for their workloads. So people are not just working out, is the value this is delivering financially better than the cost of it, but is it also better than the environmental cost of it? And so I think we're going to see drive towards efficiency around that area. And the best way to get there, I think, in many ways, is to start having small workloads that are closer to users. So you're transferring less data back and forth across the network, using less energy, and more efficient, optimized workloads.
Yeah, I have a bit mixed feelings here because I feel guilty. Look at the picture in background, of course, generated by some kind of neural networks around consuming useless energy for just a picture, one of the billions generated every day. And the point is, nobody cared about energy. Well, we are starting to care about the impact of the energy of AI. But the point is, it's so nice, cool, and easy, and so on that. Okay, they will be the new nuclear, as we were talking with Chris last edition, new facilities to create energy, but who cares? We want the AI.
I think some people do care, and I do.
No,
I share your pessimism, but not to sound like too much of an ad, but I think one of the things we've done at Platform that's really interesting is we show you the energy usage of different cloud regions that you're on. And we've gone and identified the regions that use greener energy. And if you switch your workload, your application from running in one region to one that uses greener energy, we give you a 3% discount. So I think we're going to hopefully start to see that sort of incentive more and more inside organizations. We just became a B Corp and decided that one of the things we really wanted to focus on was how do we reduce the environmental cost of technology without impacting the quality of service. And I think there are ways to do it, and we've taken a few little baby steps, but I hope we see much more in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, there is the tendency, the trend, but I feel like, when you are on a diet and then you see this fancy new cake, wonderful, and you break everything because it's nice and good. And so who cares about your...
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess also in this case, we'll see. It's a question I don't know how interesting it is, but a question I'm always doing. When you will be 100 years old, and I hope you will get there, what kind of computer will you be using? What will be your computing device?
Yeah. I think it's funny, isn't it? Because we've seen all these attempts to invent the future of, holographic displays projected in the air and VR goggles. But did anyone ever really predict that the phone was going to become such an important interface to things? And I think we've tried a lot of different interfaces and a lot haven't worked. I think I definitely went through a phase of I started trying to set up, voice control for everything in my house of, hey, Google, go do this. Oh, literally, it's responding in the corner. You can't hear it right now. But my Google system just responded and told me it didn't know what I was talking about. It's not that great. Voice, it's useful for some things, but it's actually not as good as what I'm replacing it with now, which is just putting sensors all through the house so that, as you move, it turns on the lights rather than having to tell it to turn on the lights. I don't know. I would love VR to work, but, the headsets are still really too big. I think we've seen, Apple made a huge splash with the Vision Pro, and the sales have not been where it's at. We haven't found the killer app for it. I would like to think we're not typing on keyboards, still getting RSI
I
in
think
when I'm
we
100.
will still have a QWERTY under the fingers in what
Probably still QWERTY, yeah.
good old QWERTY layout somewhere. But yeah, I guess I don't know. Maybe it's like talking now or writing. We lost the habit of writing by hand, and now we write by keyboards. And well, I don't know. I guess writing is still something that is possibly going to remain in our daily lives.
Well, I think it will. So I take notes on a tablet with a pencil and a stylus. And I really noticed this was all provoked by me reading an article talking about how when we write, we understand what we're listening. If you're taking notes and you're writing, you understand and you synthesize, which creates a better level of awareness and understanding. Whereas when you type out notes, you tend to transcribe. You just write down what the person said rather than thinking about it and working out how to summarize and synthesize it. And I definitely know that. So I take notes all the time in meetings and I almost never look at them. But the action of taking the note creates a better awareness and understanding. So yeah, maybe we'll work out a better way to get the best of both worlds.
I guess we will only see this when we will be there. I always ask also what kind of person I should invite to this, let's call it podcast. I mean, well, any name you would suggest for
Absolutely. So she's going to get a little bit annoyed maybe because she wasn't like. You should invite Alana Brown to come along. So Alana started the whole State of DevOps movement when she was at Puppet. She started the idea of researching and investigating this space. She never really sought a high profile through it and did an incredible job. And she's now working at a very interesting AI company, Lamini, who are working on enterprise LLMs and optimization. So I think you should absolutely have a chat with Alana. And Alana, I'm sorry, I've just volunteered you for Alessandro's podcast.
I hope it will be a good occasion to see her again after.
The other people, I don't know if you've talked to them or know them, but the other names that come to mind are the team topologies people, Manuel and Matt Skelton, because I genuinely think what they've done around team topologies is it is the best blueprint for software organizations that I've seen anyone do. It's incredibly pragmatic. I think it fits into, fuels the whole platform engineering movement, the whole product movement of becoming product oriented in how you work. Huge fans of the work they've done at Team Topologies.
Have you tried or managed to follow those?
Yeah, I actually had quite a lot of success at a few really big financial institutions when I was at Puppet doing consulting work, where we very much set up platforms, then value stream teams, and followed the sort of small number of teams where you essentially have enabling teams, complicated subsystem teams, platform and value teams. And I'm in the middle of starting to look at some of that internally myself as well. But yeah, I think it is the way to scale out. And if you're a very small group of people, 20 or 30 developers, maybe you don't need to be following this sort of process. But I think as soon as you get to a couple of hundred people and coordination between people becomes difficult, I think this is the way to both have reliability and speed, or flexibility and control, like those things that are often in tension, I think this is the way to get to them. I can't speak highly enough for the work they've done. I think it's incredible.
Yeah, indeed. Also because, I always seen this, the bigger the company, the less efficient it is in some way.
Yep, absolutely.
And it's harder to make many people work together, and so you see these pyramids and layers and middlemen and
Yep.
things which are not always functional.
And I think, honestly, this is the way, if you want to move quickly, you need a platform and you need people who build things on the platform. And we see this with the whole platform engineering movement, the internal developer platform movement. All of these things go in the same direction. So I think you need, at a certain scale, you have to operate as a platform. And your choice becomes, do you build it yourself on top of something like Kubernetes, which is not a platform in itself, it's a runtime, and you have to build stuff on top of it? Do you buy something that sits on top of Kubernetes? Or do you use a managed service like the one we're doing? And so I think there's this whole spectrum of, do you adopt platform as a service? Do you buy an internal developed platform, or do you build your own? And I think that choice is in front of most companies these days.
So what's your take about this? DevOps is dead, the platform engineering is the next thing.
So I have mixed feelings. And now that I'm no longer at a DevOps company, I can maybe be a little less diplomatic than I think that I've been in the past. I think the term DevOps is meaningless these days. And unfortunately, one of the most common definitions I tended to see inside large organizations was the people who run CI/CD, the people who run your Jenkins, your GitHub Actions. It's the people who do operations for developers, which I don't think was ever the point. And the whole idea of a DevOps engineer, where you're spending all of your time in QA and test and CI/CD, that's release engineering, which I think is a really important discipline, but it's not DevOps. And I think if we look at DevOps the DevOps movement, I think, changed how people thought about building infrastructure and following declarative configs and all of these sorts of things. But I don't think we created the cultural change across the industry that we were really looking for. And maybe some of the misunderstanding was, I think there are a lot of developers out there who don't want anything to do with ops. Like, they didn't go into a job where they cared about infrastructure. They want to write code and they want to build applications and they want to operate at that layer. And I think as ops people, we all thought everyone wants to do ops.
Yeah, but I guess the idea is not the people doing other people work, but the way they work together, on each one on their own side, so to say.
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes I think we made in the DevOps movement, I've done a few talks around this, is that we kept talking about culture. And I think the word culture, it's not useful. It's not useful or actionable in terms of creating change. So if you're inside a big organization and you go, we need to change the culture, what does that mean? Like, everyone has a different interpretation of what that means. It's not specific. And it doesn't really, I think, improve things to go, we're going to create a working group to improve culture. I think because culture feels like such a huge topic in a big organization, it's like climate change, to come back to that. A lot of people feel like as an individual, you can't do anything to impact climate change, and you can't do anything to impact the culture inside your organization. But if you pick something more specific, like the flow of software is too difficult through the system, or it's too complicated and hard for these teams to work with each other, then you can focus on actually solving those problems. And I think you get things into a better state. I also think one of my theories is software does more to change culture inside organizations than deliberate attempts to change culture. So, for example, I think, one of the things Puppet did for a lot of people was it let ops people collaborate around the version control repository before the change went out. So rather than, Alessandro going, the database server is down, and us both SSHing into it and trying to debug and work out what's wrong, we could try collaborate at the Puppet level and work out what to do. And I think that created a cultural change inside organizations. I think messaging frameworks like NATS fundamentally change the culture in your organization because they enable teams to become autonomous and go, okay, we can trust there's a messaging service tying us all together. I can just work on my component and I can move as quickly as possible, the promise of microservices. And I think similarly, you adopt something like a PaaS or a SaaS, it changes the culture inside teams because of the software.
So it's the tool.
I think it's the tool. And I think this is one of the mistakes we made inside the DevOps movement, where we all started saying, DevOps is not about tools. Bullshit. It was always about tools. But I think we underplayed the cultural change that the tools enabled. One of my theories is we're all too nice to each other in the DevOps space. Like the movement started and, we had all of the people, we had the Puppet people, we had the Chef people, we had the Terraform people coming along later, the Ansible people. And there was sort of this, let's not actually honestly criticize each other's tools. So you turn up to a DevOps days and no one would actually sit there and go, I think Puppet is terrible because of X, Y, Z. We all just played nice with each other. And I think we lacked honest criticism around our tools.
It's interesting because this is the fourth episode I'm recording. I'm asking sometimes similar questions to you, to Chris Buitart, to Patrick Debois, and you are now. And the nice thing is the kind of different answers I get. And that's why this is interesting for me. Okay, so before ending, I know you have some time constraints. The question I haven't asked, but you would like to reply to.
What was the questions?
A question that I haven't asked yet. I will never ask because I don't know it, but you would like to reply to. Something that you would like to reply, to talk about, or whatever.
I don't know, actually. What would come? I think we've covered a lot of the sort of common bases around this. I think maybe open source. What is genuinely the state of open source in 2024? And I worry about it because I do think we're caught in this uncomfortable position where the freedoms that if you create a project, you put it under an open source license, the freedoms that enabled have caused problems for companies who were trying to make money out of it. And, we've got the classic thing of the cloud hyperscalers can just come along and take your open source and turn it into a service. And because they're huge and they have so much reach, it's very difficult for you to make money. I think this poses all sorts of interesting questions where I don't believe that all of the changes of different licenses and, the stuff going on with Automatic and WordPress at the moment of them wanting to take money back from people using open source. I don't think license changes are the answer, but I also think how many genuinely industry-changing open source technologies didn't have a company behind them at some point. So I think even if you look at Linux, lots of huge companies are paying all the Linux core kernel developers. There's not that many projects I can think of that didn't require someone to be commercially successful for the open source to be successful. Curl's probably a good example. Daniel Steinberg does an incredible job with Curl, and that's probably one of the most impactful small building blocks of our industry out there. Like Curl is an incredible project, and everyone should donate money to Daniel Steinberg and to Curl. But yeah, what does it mean if everyone wanted to copy Red Hat for ages, but I think it was an accident of a point in time. And if I look at, we had this really healthy community between the Puppet folks, the Ansible folks, the Chef folks, all around open source and community and contributing to each other. What are those new projects? Because I don't think the CNCF is the answer to everything. And if I look at the sort of community that builds around those things, it's different to the community we had, Alessandro. There was something intimate and positive and amazing about that space. And maybe I'm just like an old graybeard, but I think we've lost something.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about that, monetization first, which is fine because you need to live and to make people work for you if you want to work on an open source project, which has some sides. But at the same time, it was not, I guess, the first drive some years ago.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's say good old times of Stallman are gone, and that's one point. And on the
I
other
don't think
side,
I believe in open core anymore. I think open core is fundamentally sort of doomed in many ways for organizations, because you always end up in competition with your community. So if you've got an open source product and then you try and sell value add on top of it, I think unless you're doing it as a SaaS and giving away all the code for free so people can run it themselves, you just end up in this funny competitive landscape. And you saw this around Puppet. If someone went and created a really great dashboard around Puppet, open source, in many ways that competed with the value proposition of Puppet Enterprise. And it becomes very difficult as a software vendor to be authentic to your community and support them, but also try and make money. And so I think open core is problematic today's age.
yeah, still the point is also that most of these, if you think about that, all the internet is built on open source software.
Yeah.
Most of the internet. And if this project weren't open source, they wouldn't have been used a lot. So the same success of a lot of software is based on the fact that it's been open source.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I agree there is a problem when there are predators of the open source work,
Yeah.
which not only use the open source, but build products on top of that. And maybe they are more successful, they don't have all the weight of maintaining the core and everything. At the same time, it's also strange that, for example, HashiCorp, as Redis, as many others, when they try to protect themselves from these abuses, I would say, but in some ways is also abuse, but is also in the true spirit of open source, no?
Yeah, and it was like, that's what you get for giving away the software. And I have to say, I'm on the side of, I think it's fine to be closed source software is fine. Open source software is fine, but you shouldn't start open source and then start to close it and change it. I think when you first release software under an open source license, that creates an implicit contract between you and the users of that software. And I think changing that contract, I understand exactly why people are doing this and why companies are doing it, but I don't like it. It feels like a step backwards, and it feels a bit bait and switch, I think. So I guess that to sum that all up is, open source is not free, and you should just be, really conscious of the implications when you go and decide to make open source part of your business.
Indeed, but yeah, so many different facets of this discussion, which is actually quite interesting. But there is something happening in some way. The winds are changing. And I'm not really sure if they are changing for the right direction from my perspective.
Yeah.
So, Nigel, I guess we are there.
We're at time. It was lovely to catch up with you. Always happy to talk.
Yeah, and I guess see you somewhere in some conference sometime.
I'll see you in some conference. Maybe at FOSDEM, and we can continue the conversation.
Great. Thank you again. All the best for the future.
Cheers. See you, man.
Abnormal DevOps iterations.